Well, I started to watch the newest iteration of the Karate Kid franchise, and it does look interesting a little bit. I don't know how many retreads you could do of this thing, but anyway, I watched a slight bit, and my associates decided to interrupt because they had some other things that they were wanting to talk about. Um, they wanted to talk about General Patton of World War II, the famous general who was in North Africa, and he kicked the pants out of the Germans, Rommel. And, or was it the Battle of the Bulge? Or both. Anyway, Patton was George C. Scott, the actor, played Patton in the famous movie. And what they wanted to bring up was the fact that the politicians had decided how World War II was going to end up before it was finished. There was a great meeting at Yalta, which is southern Russia, where Joseph Stalin met Franklin D. Roosevelt and Sir Winston Churchill, and they decided to draw a map of what Europe was going to look like after World War II was done. Now, lo and behold, the military weren't part of this. This was all political. So Mr. Patton had a chance to take Germany without the Russian help, in which case we never would have had East Germany and, basically the whole of the Russian Empire that was, post-World War II. So the question begs, well, why wasn't Patton allowed to do this? The politicians said you can't do this, but what was behind the politicians? And the answer is, the politicians were all for having a permanent state of war. It's called the Great Game, and the Great Game is about the great powers having endless wars. The back of the mind of the politicians is, who do I really report to? And it's the rich corporations. And the rich corporations want to continually build munitions for endless war. It keeps the economy going, creates jobs. And so that was the rationale for splitting up Germany in two, and why Patton was not allowed to win the war for the Americans and change the course of history. So, once again, I bring it to your attention that politicians are not your friends. They are the friends of the rich industrialists. And, of course, the rich industrialists would say, well, if we're in a great recession, you got to get the factories rolling, and the way to do that is to have a war, so we can mobilize all the people in factories and armies and things. This is the old style of running planet Earth. So, it gets to the root of the whole economic system is designed so that you have cycles, up and down cycles, and you have, the people start screaming when there's no work and they can't afford to buy things. So it's, an offshoot of capitalism, but it's the economics of, a money society. And, where do you go from there? Is it worth killing millions and millions of people so you can prostate drown or something? That be... think about it. You are... Maybe I've made my point. It's all about...
Hi, it's Panda. Okay, so I have to step in here because Harry Weaver, who was talking before, was getting tapped by our producer, Bob Frizzell, that, he had to shut up because, we have somebody else that's going to come in and give you some further elucidation of, various other people. I was going to talk about Patton, but now I'm being told, no, I'm not going to talk about Patton anymore. I'm not going to talk about anything else. We just want you to go back and think about it. Patton could have won World War II in Europe, but he wasn't allowed to. He was restrained. Where else was this heard? Vietnam. The politicians would not allow the generals to win the war in Vietnam. Think about that. But, if you look at the history, time and again, the generals said the politicians would not let us use everything that we had in order to win the war. In Korea, well, the Americans had the nuclear bomb, and they were tempted to use it, but they were also concerned that Red China... Now, in the mid-50s, Red China did get a bomb, a nuclear bomb, and they also had unbelievably large amounts of population to draw from for an army. Well, I don't know. And Draco, checks and balances. You have to review the history files and watch the History Channel. But the proposition that was made on one of my earlier videos was, if you're going to bring heaven to earth, we already said you have to get rid of money. And if you look at it and you want to eliminate wars and things, well, what is war all about? It's, some say, Van Clausewitz said it was an extension of politics. And what's politics about? Well, influence and power and, sovereignty. So what's sovereignty? Well, it's basically within a certain territory, these are the rules, and, we're the ones who enforce the rules in this territory. So, and we said we want to abolish these elections that create representative governments because it doesn't work. So how are you going to govern yourself? Is it going to be an anarchy, every man for himself, or is it going to be something else? We're taking a pregnant pause because we're expecting you to come up with an answer. What do you want? We already said, I don't want what we've got. We got to come up with something and replace it. It's got to be a great leap forward. They had in China. To the communist. Go and say there was great mass starvations. So, you don't want to repeat the past. You got to learn your history. You got to learn what was done in the past. People tried to make a great leap forward. Chairman Mao, the Gang of Four, you look them up. Kinds of crazy things. Get rid of all the intellectuals. That was Pol Pot. In Cambodia, they called it the killing fields. If you were a teacher, well, even if you had eyeglasses. If you had eyeglasses, you were assumed that you needed them so you could read. So Pol Pot figured, well, we don't want any intellectuals, anyone that can read. So if you own eyeglasses, you will be shot. And they did. So you have to know your history very well before you choose a new way to run your person and your society. Technology, some people say science is the answer, but science developed all these horrible weapons that kill people and crazy stories on the internet that nobody wants to believe. But the Chinese were developing soldier robots
and the soldier robots turned on their makers and killed 28 Chinese. Now, I don't know if that's true. I mean, somebody poo-pooed the report, but I mean, theoretically, it's possible to make a robot that can shoot. If it's not here now, it will be here soon. In Canada, we're not even allowed to arm ourselves. We don't have the Second Amendment of the United States. You're allowed, hunting rifles or shotguns, but, compared with if the Clone Wars of Star Wars come forward and, whoever it is that sends a clone army of robots at us, what are we going to do to stop them? Well, I'm sorry, in Canada, you've got gun restrictions. Heavy duty, you can't have guns for the population. The army is very small, and the Navy has got obsolete ships, and the new ships building program, well, they don't even have a timetable to develop ships. I cannot understand how in World War II you could create fleets of thousands of ships in, 6 years. And modern day, it's endless billions of dollars to build new ships, and there's no timetable for the delivery. So, somebody said that the Chinese now are poking their nose up in northern waters of the Arctic that belong to Canada. I don't doubt it at all. All of my friends in Western Canada that have got all their paws in all the oil know that there's oil in the northern Canada. Someone with 1 billion people, China, wants to get their paws on it, and they've got great big military. The Canadians usually look to the Americans, but, the latest information is that the hypersonic stuff is owned by the Russians and the Chinese, and the Americans pretend to be able to defend themselves, but the word on the street is that they've lost the ability to defend their own continent. And all the bluster about Donald Trump and his wall and shutting down the government is really a cover story, because they're scared shitless that if people start looking, go ahead and look at the Russians and the Chinese. They've got far more power militarily than the Americans do. And the Americans have not kept up their nuclear weapons. If you saw 60 Minutes from some years back, they looked at where the missile silos were in North Dakota, and they saw that they were using floppy disks from the 1980s to run the software for these nuclear missiles. So, nuclear blackmail. Well, what are you going to do? I mean, if you've got a belligerent that's got all kinds of weaponry, and you haven't kept up, despite your trillions and trillions of dollars that Mr. Bush and Mr. Cheney invested, no one knows where it went, but didn't go on the right projects. So, Andreka, we would say, whoever that leader was, up with her head, macho. I think we're running long on this video, so I'll just leave it at that. Am I concerned? I might take up cat sitting. $6 an hour? Can I raise your fridge? I'm Pindar. And that was Harry Weaver at the beating.